Welcome to the session on peacekeeping, peace operations, and challenges. Traditional peacekeeping entails a third-party intervention, deployment of forces, often but not always done by military forces, to assist parties in transitioning from violent conflict to peace by separating and keeping them apart. After a peace agreement is signed, peacekeepers enable space for implementation of the agreement, and this takes some time. Peacekeepers serve as guarantors of peace. Who are peacekeepers? Peacekeepers are usually soldiers and military officers, civilian police officers, and civilian personnel from many different countries. They monitor and observe peace processes that emerge in post-conflict situations and assist former adversaries in implementing the peace agreements they have signed. For example, UNTAES in Croatia was in charge of disarmament, providing health services and enabling local capacity building in conflict-stricken areas. There are 6 characteristics or principles of peacekeeping: neutrality, impartiality in the dispute, and non-intervention in the fighting; light military equipment, use of force only in self-defense, consent of the conflicting parties, prerequisite of a ceasefire agreement. Some important tasks of peacekeeping operations are as follows: preventive deployment to zones of conflict, verification of ceasefire agreements, safe areas, and troop withdrawal, disarmament and demobilization of combatants, mine clearance, training, and awareness programs, providing secure conditions for humanitarian aid and peacebuilding functions. It is important to mention few limitations of the peacekeeping forces. Some peacekeeping operations were not as effective because the military personnel were lightly armed, and for implementing their tasks, they required the consent of the parties involved. So it was difficult to perform their peacekeeping duties, ensure security, and protect the civilian population. At the same time, because peacekeeping forces are composed of military personnel, they are ill-equipped to perform any state-building functions except in support role. The Department of Peacekeeping Operations, DPKO, provides political and executive direction to UN peacekeeping operations around the world and maintains contact with the Security Council, troop and financial contributors, and parties to the conflict in the implementation of the Security Council provisions. The United Nations is not the only organization to implement peacekeeping operations. Non-UN peacekeeping forces include the NATO, ECOWAS, the AU, the EU, among many others. For example, NATO mission in Kosovo provided needed security and disarmament of combatants, which enabled peaceful transition. While decisions about establishing, maintaining, and expanding a peacekeeping operations are taken by the Security Council, the financing of the UN peacekeeping operations is the collective responsibility of all UN member states. Every member state is legally obligated to pay their respective share towards peacekeeping. This is in accordance with the provisions of the Article 17 of the Charter of the United Nations. The General Assembly apportions peacekeeping expenses based on a special scale of assessment under a complex formula that member states themselves have established. This formula takes into account, among other things, the relative economic wealth of member states, with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council required to pay a larger share because of their special responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. But how much does peacekeeping cost? For example, the approved budget for UN peacekeeping operations for the fiscal year 2013-2014 was about $7.83 billion. By way of comparison, this is less than half of 1% of world military expenditures, estimated at $1,753 billion in 2012. Traditional peacekeeping missions involved observational tasks performed by military personnel. These multidimensional missions were designed to ensure the implementation of comprehensive peace agreements and assist in laying the foundations for sustainable peace. Why did they change? Because the nature of conflicts changed. In mid-1990s, there was a reassessment of peacekeeping after failure in Rwanda, Somalia, and Yugoslavia. In these cases, peacekeepers face situations where warring parties failed to adhere to peace agreements and where the peacekeepers themselves were not provided adequate resources or political support. The UN was asked to perform even more complex tasks. This started in 1999 when the UN served as the administrator of both Kosovo in the former Yugoslavia, as UN Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, UNMIK, and in East Timor, now Timor-Leste, UN Transitional Administration in East Timor, UNTAET, which was in the process of gaining independence from Indonesia. Peacekeeping, since its beginnings over 50 years ago, has not been an overwhelming success, but peacekeepers managed to learn from past mistakes. Thank you for listening.